word, and through the foolishness of preaching, may we learn more about you and ourselves. And I pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to start by talking about a superhero that kind of introduced the study. The superhero, I was never really, when I was a comic book fan and never really read, I thought he was boring, and I actually probably would still think he's boring, but that superhero is Captain America. He's actually just a boring superhero to me. He just doesn't have, and part of that, he is one of the only Marvel superheroes that has come from that first wave where they're perfect and there's no problems. And, he was killed off because it was not working right. They tried to reinvent him as this anti-communist fighting guy, and that wasn't working. So they're like, oh, let's just let him be. And then they suddenly okay, we need a new superhero to spice up the Avengers, so they resurrected him. And then he was always kind of like the Boy Scout superhero. He did always made the right decision. He was the leader, and he might have some fights with some of the members, but it seemed like he was always the right one. So it was kind of, he always did the right thing. And to me, that's largely boring, which points out why, when we study the book of Judges, Othniel doesn't come to mind, because he's kind of the one that does all the right thing and he's boring. What's interesting about Captain America is that later, he got more interesting because he took on, he's supposed to be the guy that's pro-America, but then, America doesn't always do everything right, and Captain America does. So what's somebody that's supposed to be Captain America do in that situation? And so there's interesting storylines when America doesn't always do right. And one of the in the comic books, one of the most interesting stories was a story arc called Civil War, which pitted Iron Man versus Captain America. Now the movie was nowhere near as good as the comic book, but it was this idea of this, and it was created and written, after 9/11, dealing with the Patriot Act, and they came up with the Superhero Registration Act, where there's this spying and this control putting upon superheroes. And Iron Man, who is, the Batman of the Marvel Universe, the rich guy with all the money, is really pushing it and promoting it so that there would be this control upon these superheroes. And the one who opposed him was Captain America, and he opposed the American government. So Captain America opposes the American government and becomes a rebel, and that was the most interesting to me story about Captain America, because all of a sudden he's trying to always do the right thing, but doing the right thing doesn't always mean that you are in line with your nation. And so I think that's just kind of an interesting dynamic, and it kind of made for an interesting story, but he was always trying to do the right thing, because he felt like that was an invasion of prophecy, an invasion of rights, an invasion of freedom. And it's kind of this interesting dynamic that, what if you're always trying to do right, and then the group you're working for doesn't? So it's a fascinating, interesting thing. And I use that to kind of segue into Othniel, who is the guy who, in the Bible, he's one of the people that he is not sinless, but like him and Daniel are Joseph has questionable stuff. You could get into that. Joseph does some things that scratch your head, but Othniel and Daniel are two people that are they just do the right things. Daniel has more exciting things happening to him, but Othniel, we'll look at that story. So Othniel's actually, his biography's popped into the introduction. So turn in your Bibles to Judges chapter 1. Judges chapter 1. In verse 12, Judges 1 and verse 12. Judges 1 verse 12, and Caleb said, "He who attacks Kiriath Sefer and captures it, I'll give him Aksah, my daughter, for a wife." So here you have Caleb, Judah is losing steam in its conquest of its portion of the Canaan land, and they come to a really hard inhabitants that are grounded in there, and he's trying to find a way to motivate his troops to push forward through the lull and through, because he wants to be faithful. You have to remember Caleb. Caleb, where was he famous for before this? What story do we all know him from? He's one of the 12 spies, right? So Caleb, one of the 12 spies, him and Joshua, the two faithful spies, they're the ones that encourage Israel to, hey, we should go do this. The other 10 say no, and they, even though they're outvoted in the board meeting, they went along with the wrong vote and did what the church said. That's a whole nother sermon, but it's important to know that if you think the church is supposed to do something and you're outvoted, that does not mean you go start your own church or you pout or you quit going to church. Because Caleb and Joshua's examples say, hey, you know what, we're going to be a testimony that you're making the wrong decision, but we're going to stick with it anyway, and we're going to, we won't tell you we told you so, but by an example and going forward, we're going to basically tell you we told her so without saying anything. And that's what Caleb and Joshua did, and they stuck through it. All of their friends ended up perishing in the wilderness, and in their old age, they're leading the conquest into the Canaan land. And he's leading Judah. And so he gets to this point, and he's like, no, we're not falling back now. I waited way too long to get into this promised land, and I will do whatever it takes. And so he offers, hey, whoever wins this battle, you get my daughter for a bride. So, but there's a side note. In the ancient Near East, it's the father's responsibility to make sure that his kids marry the right person, and especially the daughter. So he wants to make sure that his daughter marries the right husband. And what better pick than a military hero? So it's like a win-win. Now, in our modern sensibilities, arranged marriage, all this stuff would look really terrible. But when you read the story, there's no complaint from Aksa. She's like, yeah, I'll take a military hero. That would be good. So he does that, and he spurs them on. And Caleb also wants somebody that has covenant faithfulness, that knows that their job is supposed to be taking over this part of the Canaan land, and that would risk their life to do so. That's the kind of husband she wants, someone that will be faithful to God and will trust in God to be able to do this, that will be able to know that God can give me this victory. And so he lines it all up. Verse 13, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave Aksa his daughter for a wife. So Othniel's introduced as a Kenizzite. So he's not even a Judahite by blood. And he's related to Caleb. So you have the tribe of Judah being led by people who aren't even from the tribe of Israel. The tribe of Israel does not necessarily, being of the tribe of Judah, you don't have to be an Israelite. As long as you're faithful, they would take you in. So these Kenizzites, Caleb included. So Caleb, right, the one who's faithful as a spy, and then faithful, he's leading the whole tribe of Judah. And he's not even of the tribe by blood. And then his, the younger brother word, Hebrew, it's, that's the literal, but it literally could be younger descendant, cousin. It just means that he's of the same family, but doesn't mean necessarily within the exactly nuclear family. It's kind of like, in certain cultures, everybody's a cousin. It's a little bit like that, except for you would be blood related, and everyone blood related would be brother and sister. So that's what's going on there. And so you have Othniel, who's not even of the tribe of Judah, Caleb, who's not even of the tribe of Judah, being the faithful ones in the tribe of Judah. And so Caleb captures it, and he gets Aksa as his wife. And so then Aksa comes on the scene, verse 14. So I'm going to, I don't know what version you have, but I'm going to do a translation that there's a lot of problems. Like, you could translate this many ways. I'm going to give you a clear Hebrew that fits with everything. So follow along with me. Then it came about when she arrived that she induced him, that is Caleb, by asking for a field from her father, and she dismounted from the donkey, and Caleb said to her, "What concerns you?" So Oxa comes on the scene. It was very passive before. She's just the prize to be won. And then the very next verse, she comes in and she takes the initiative. And she goes, and it's a very forward in the Hebrew. She induces him. She goes to her dad, the patriarch of the family, and says, "Hey, I need something from you." And gets off her donkey. So there's like this forwardness, but at the same time, this humility. So she gets off the donkey and approaches him, not coming up to him on high, but comes down to him in a very humble way, but a very pointed and forceful but not aggressive way. It says, "Hey, I need this blessing." And Caleb responds, "Okay, what do you want?" And so she says to him, "Give me a blessing," verse 15, "since you have set me in the land of Negev, give me also the springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So she comes and she's like, "Listen, out of all the land, you gave me the worst piece of land." We don't understand that because we don't live in Canaan. We don't understand what the Negev is. That's the desert. So you're an agricultural society and you give me the desert? Come on, Dad. You use me as a prize. You put this guy into a desperate situation. You offered my bride, and then the dowry is the worst piece of your land? This is what you're going to do to me? I don't think this is good enough, Dad. The dad doesn't argue. He's like, "You're right. I'll give you the springs too." This is why there is no condemnation towards her behavior. The forwardness, she's actually seen as being very faithful. Because why does she want the springs? In an agricultural society, she doesn't want her family to starve. She wants her family to be flourished. She wants her family. She is practicing covenant faithfulness. She's like, "I want my allotted piece of land. God promised me this, and I'm going to take hold of it, and it's going to be a blessing. And Dad, you can't make dumb decisions to get in my way." This is what Caleb should have done when his military was waning. "God, you promised me this land. I implore you, do not let the Canaanites take it over. Drive them out." Instead, he kind of plays his game, "I'll offer my wife up as a prize." So it's a subtle rebuke to Caleb the way his daughter act. But the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because she is acting like Caleb, who's faithful no matter what the circumstances are. "I don't care how big those people are, we can take the land. I don't care, Dad, that you gave me a bad piece of land. I'm going to come to you and I'm going to demand more for my family. I expect better from you." And Caleb, if it was a problem, Caleb would have said no. But he immediately said, "Why wouldn't I do this? I want you to be blessed." And I think this is important when it comes to understanding the relationship between men and women and why this is so ideal. Sometimes we read the Bible and we always look at it like thinking that this patriarchal society is oppressive towards women and all this stuff, but this would be revolutionary writing at the time. This would be like, wow, a woman was allowed to approach the patriarch of the family and demand a better piece of the inheritance. She's a woman. She doesn't supposed to have that. And Caleb's like faithful. He's like, "Wow, this is the kind of girl that I raised. Awesome. I'm giving you that." And so I think so many times that we look at the relationships between men and women in the Bible, and I think we read it through some glasses of the culture that they were in, or the culture that we're in, and not understanding that God was always pushing for better for his children, and including the women. And he didn't want his women to be in oppressive things. And we will see that through the commentary, through the book of Judges. So She insists on being blessed in the land. It's given to her. It's awesome. And so I think this is important, that when it comes to like the relationship between men and women in the marriage, I find that a very strong man would want a woman like Aksa, who's very strong as well. Othniel, being very faithful to God, wouldn't want just some mousy woman that is just not doing anything for her family. When you look at the Proverbs 31 woman, how does it describe her? Industrious, waking up early, selling things. That, you know, this whole idea that the man works and the woman stays at home, when was that invented? And why was it invented? Do you know? During the Industrial Revolution, as a way to get the men to work really long hours and not have to worry about their home. It's a modern invention, because in Israelite society, how are they making their money? They're farming, right? Crops and animals. And a family farm, what do you think? The guy is going out and milking the cow and doing everything, and the woman's just cleaning the house? It's a family farm. Who's all working? The whole family, kids and everything. This whole idea that women shouldn't work and men should work was a modern invention that we impose upon the Bible and think it's biblical. That's called eisegesis. Exegesis shows that the woman should also take responsibility for her family, and that is praised. And that's why Aksa is an ideal woman here in the Bible, because she doesn't just be quiet and let her family get the short end of the stick. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So that's just this glimpse of Othniel. So now let's go to the Judges cycle proper in chapter 3. Judges chapter 3 and verse 7. Judges chapter 3 and verse 7. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, so what is it to do evil in the sight of the Lord? Basically, to do evil in the sight of the Lord in the context of Judges is to forget or to turn away from him, and then to serve these many lords, the Baals, right? So the people do what's evil in the sight of the Lord, and it says they forgot their God, and they served the Baals and the Asheroths. Now, we went over this morning what Baal is. What's a Baal? What's the word Baal? Lord, right? So the many lords. And we talked about how idolatry can be good or bad things. And so we shouldn't look down upon Israel, because they could also we shouldn't look down upon Israel at that time as idolaters, because we ourselves could easily fall into idolatry just like them. We just might not make a statue of it. Instead, we might hang up posters on our room, or listen to podcasts that push certain agendas, or that are ideologies that might not be fully in line with the Bible. So we could do all of this stuff. We could be idolaters too. But I want to look at this idea of Asheroth. Now, Asheroth is a fertility goddess, so she's representing the fertility cult. Now, what's a fertility cult, you might ask? It's just simply a system of nature worship in order to manipulate the gods by rites or ceremonies to ensure the productiveness of your crops, plants, livestock, and people. In an agricultural society, that would just basically be saying, I'm trying to manipulate God so I can be rich. Because the more plants I have, and the more animals I have, and the more kids I have, the more wealthy I am. And the reason why we know this is when it talks about like Abraham is wealthy, what does it immediately say? Oh, he had this many animals, and this many this, and this many this, and this many children, right? And then you look at it, it's like, well, wait, he doesn't have that many children. And that's a check mark against his prosperity. But when it comes to another rich man in the Bible, Job, again, what's it list? how many animals he has, how many things that he has, how many kids that he has, because this is letting you know, yeah, he's wealthy and this is how wealthy he is. But it's not like, oh, his net worth is this. Money hasn't been invented yet. So in an agricultural society, it's how much livestock you have, how much crops you have, and how many workers you have, aka your kids. And so in fertility worship, it is basically you worshiping and manipulating the God so that you could be blessed to be what? Wealthy. That doesn't happen in Christianity, does it? What? Pay your tithe and you'll be blessed, right? What's it called? Prosperity gospel? It might not be as prevalent in Adventism in a way, but we still have that in Christianity, and it affects us this day. The idea that if I'm faithful to God, I will be blessed, and that blessing means I'll be prosperous. And if I am unfaithful to God, I'll be poor. It creeps into us. It was in the religion of the Jews in the time of Jesus, and we can see Israel turning to that same idea here with the fertility cults, and we can be in danger of that. I'm going to keep the Sabbath because God's going to bless me. It can happen, and you can be rich and be faithful. There's warnings to the rich, but it doesn't mean you're poor, you're automatically virtuous in the eyes of God. But do not corrupt your religion and make it a manipulation of God in order that you feel that you deserve to be blessed. I keep Sabbath so this can happen. I pay tithe so this can happen. No. Remember what we said. You do anything, tithe, Sabbath keeping, whatever, serve the church, whatever it is, you do it because you have been saved and you're just returning service and worship. None of these things should be used as manipulations to God. Otherwise, you're not worshiping God. You're in a fertility cult and you just call it Christianity. And so this is what's happening to Israel. They're falling into this worshiping idols and worshiping prosperity, a prosperity gospel that's fits for agricultural society with the Baals and Asheroths. What does this do? Verse 8, therefore, because they did evil and they served the Baals and the Asheroth, therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Now, I'm a parent. I think I get this verse more than ever. Zara sometimes doesn't like to listen, and I can get angry. And when I get angry, the more anger I get is related to how dangerous what I told her not to do is what she's doing, if that makes sense. If I tell her to not do something that's irritating to me, I have a minor irritation. But if she does something really, like, I say, hey, don't do that, and it's really dangerous, I have a potentially to get extra upset. Why? Because I love her and care for her, and I don't want her to get hurt. But it's getting to the point that I'm like, all right, you keep jumping on the bed like that. I even sing the song, the monkey song? 10 little monkeys jumping on the bed, one fell off and broke at the head. That one? And I'm like, hey, I don't want you to break your head. And she's like, okay, Daddy, I'll be careful, and jumps higher. And I'm just... So that's God, right? He's the parent. He's like, this is not going to help you. This is going to hurt you. And so he gets upset. And it says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cush and Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, and the people of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. Now, this is not Mesopotamia where Babylon is. This would be Mesopotamia more the beginning of the rivers, so north in Aram. So straight north. But it's interesting. In all of the oppressors of Israel, this is probably the most powerful one who's coming down. He's a king from a whole nother powerful nation who is warlike, and he comes down and he's oppressing them for 8 years. For 8 years, they're being beaten up and oppressed. And God does this redemptively. It's not like he went and said, hey, I want this guy to come down, and he's like inspiring him to do that. He's pulling away his protection. He's like, you want to serve Baal? You want to serve Astaroth? I'll let them protect you. And he removes his protection, and this king from the north comes down and oppresses them for 8 years. Then verse 9, but when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up to deliver the people of Israel. Now, it took 8 years. I think we always miss that. They're being oppressed, and it took 8 years, and then they cried out God. That's how stubborn they were in their idolatry. That they're having a miserable life for 8 years, and they're like, maybe this isn't such a good life, and they cry out to God. 8 years, that's a long time. I mean, 8 years is a long time if you're going through a rough spot, right? So it takes them 8 years, they cry out to God, and God just waiting and waiting patiently, and immediately the Lord raised up to deliver for the people of Israel. Who saved them? Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So it does not say Othniel was doing this stuff. Othniel's probably enjoying. Remember, where is Othniel? Where's Negev? In the desert in the south. This guy's from the north. So he's probably not even feeling the heat. He's feeling the heat from the desert, but not the heat from this. So he's probably actually being blessed down there with the springs. His wife, they're probably having a good old time. And the people of Israel being beat up. And finally, verse 10, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. And he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. So the land had rest for 40 years. Not really exciting story, just Israel was doing wrong. Took him 8 years to cry out. God raises up the deliverer, puts the Holy Spirit upon him, and gives him the victory. Story over. Oh, and he had rest for 40 years. So no one wanted to go fight him because God was protecting them. And then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. End of the story. That's why we remember Samson and Gideon, all them, because that story is, it's kind of boring, and I think it's to the point. Because there's a battle that's going on, there's details that can be had, but it's almost like the author of Judges is showing you when you're faithful, it's just calm and peaceful. Not all the time. We have the story of Job. There's a war here, but it's not all this crazy, dramatic drama and craziness that happens to the other judges, even what happens to Ehud. It's just simply you're faithful and you go out and you get victories. I don't know about you, but when I was 20, I probably wanted the more wilder stuff, and obviously I did some of that. Even as a Bible worker, it's all like, yeah, let's go do mission trips, let's do all this exciting stuff. Now I'm kind of like, I would just like to have victory in my life and no more drama. Bad things can happen, but just to have this kind of like, you know what, God's got this. I'm just going to trust in him, and he's going to beat it for me. I don't know about you. I want to be like Othniel. I kind of wouldn't mind a boring life. I've had enough excitement. But that's not always what we want. And that doesn't make a good story. And we Adventists love a good story, good testimony and everything. But man, and this just goes to show the best testimony would be like people that would be like, yeah, I was raised an Adventist. I fell in love with God. And, I've given a lot of Bible studies, and he's brought me a lot of cool places, and I've had victory in my life. But we don't put those people in the pulpit because we want Samson in our pulpit and not Othniel. And I wonder why that is. Anyways, so the end of the story is not that Israel had rest or that they succeeded in doing what they're supposed to do. It's rest for 40 years. And why does it end? Because Othniel dies. So Othniel dies, and that's why we don't have rest anymore. Because what happens next? Verse 12, and the people of Israel, it can be again did, or the Hebrew is ambiguous, can be continued to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And this is probably true for both, because I'm pretty sure that even if Othniel's judging, that not everyone was giving up their Baals and Asheroths. And some people probably did. There was probably revival for those 40 years, but it probably wasn't universal because that's just the way life is. So those people who continued and started infecting the other ones, and again, Israelites start to do evil, and the revival that happened dies away. And that's what always happens when revival is based upon a human leader. It won't work because the human leader will either A, die, B, leave, or C, apostatize. The only type of revival that will have a long-lasting effect in your life is done by the one who will not die. And so we don't, even though Othniel is the ideal leader, his revival only lasted 40 years. I'm 44, that seems like a long time to me. But in the history of Judah and even the history of the Christian church, 40 years is a blink of an eye. 40 years isn't long enough or good enough. And obviously, if you keep reading the Old Testament, it's definitely not good enough. It's not even good enough in the book of Judges. And as faithful as Othniel was and the ideal leader, he still wasn't good enough. And that's one of the problems with heroes. Now, we're moving into this next judge, Ehud. Ehud, literally, this is probably one of the funniest and ironic stories in all the Bible, and it'll be a lot more entertaining than Ehud. And he is, it's not as crazy as Samson. He is a lot more faithful than Samson, but there's some even funny stuff that doesn't pop out unless the Hebrew is read, and I will bring this out to you because who wants to learn Hebrew, right? So. Anyways, the people of Israel again, or can be continued, what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab. The word Eglon, the king of Moab, means bull, young bull, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. It's repeated that they did evil in the sight of the Lord, so it's emphasizing, the reason why God sent Eglon, it's because they did evil. And because they did evil. It's putting an exclamation point. It's not God's fault. It's Israel's fault. So Eglon gathers himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. So he wasn't even good enough to do it on himself. He had to go get allies to do it. So he's not even a strong oppressor, but Israel is at the point that it doesn't matter. They can have a weak oppressor now. They don't need a king of Mesopotamia to do the work. They can just have the guy from across the Jordan River do it with his buddies, and they will do it. So the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. It's not 8 now, it's 18. So they'll put up with, they want their Baals so bad and their Asheroth so bad because they know crying out what that means. They have to change their ways. They want those things so bad that they will suffer now, not 8 years, but 18 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up to them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. Now, the word Ehud is interesting. It's where is the glory? It's almost like his parents were like, he's Othniel's generation, the parents, and we're not doing the right thing. And so we're going to call our kid, where's the glory? and he's a son of Gera. Gera is a clan of Benjamin. And then word Benjamin, he's of the tribe of Benjamin. This is why it's always ironic. Do you know what the word Benjamin means? Ben is son of my right hand. And then it says he's a left-handed man. See that in the Hebrew, like you'd be reading this and you'd chuckle. So that is he's the son of the right hand, but he's left-handed man. But in the way they describe left hand, it's not just that he's left-handed. The way it's described is he's left-handed because of an injury or a crippleness. So he's not left-handed because he was born that way. He's left-handed because he's been crippled. So he can't use his right hand. And in a society, like in our society, we look down upon the physically disabled. It was doubly so in the ancient Near East. So he would have marks against him because he's physically handicapped. He's crippled. His hand can't work. So he is not what you would suspect as a military deliverer. So the people of Israel send tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. So tribute means, it's kind of like, this is kind of what tribute is. In the ancient Near East, it's kind of like what the mafia does or did in like New York City. Hey, we'll protect your business. Protect it from what? From us. So pay us money. That's tribute. You want to have peace? You pay us money. If you don't, we beat you up. That's tribute in the ancient Near East. So the whole idea of tribute is you pay someone so that you don't. It's like it's the bully thing. Like the bully wants your lunch money. I'm not giving you my lunch money. Well, then I'm going to beat it out of you. You know, that's what he's doing. I want my tribute. Then you guys can go have the rest, right? So Ehud's going to bring the tribute. So Ehud, he's like, all right, I'll bring the tribute. And what does he do? Verse 16, he makes himself a sword with two edges. The word two edges can mean two edges or it can mean two mouths, which is very funny because the word two mouths means double meaning. And all the rest of, there's already been double meanings. The rest of the story, there's tons of double meanings being thrown about in this story. So it's like, and the sword also is symbolic of the word. So it's this funny thing. He makes a two-edged sword, and then he also speaks double speak. It's just kind of a funny thing. So it's a cubit in length, which is, like about your elbow to wrist. That's quite long. That'll come up later. And he bounds it, he puts it on his right thigh, not his left thigh. Right. Because when you are getting frisked for a weapon, everyone's going to check what? Your left, because a right-handed person is going to draw from the left. But he puts it on his right thigh. So there's kind of this foreshadowing. And so then you read, and then he goes and presents the tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab. And is he going to bring the sword out? Nope, he just presents the tribute. And then it randomly says, Eglon's a very fat man. Now, see, it's funny. We laughed at the things that wouldn't be funny to Israel. Because of very Western culture, fat is something you tease and mock, right? But in agricultural society, when you're working all day in the field, it's very hard to get fat. So fatness is a sign of prosperity, and it's actually a positive quality. In fact, the word fat here would be more like physically fit, so more like hulking. You have a disabled person going up against a Hulk, like a pro wrestler, and you have Ehud, who's a cripple. So it's setting the stage, like, what's Ehud gonna do? Here, he's a very husky, robust, healthy man. He's been living high off the tribute. He doesn't have to work in the fields. He can just sit and collect it, and he can just be strong and powerful. So you have that set up. He's a very fat man. When Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sends the people who carry the tribute back. Because again, agricultural society, you're not going and paying with cash. You're bringing in, your products. So he sends them back. And then verse 19, he himself turned back at the idols. And the wording here, it's just interesting. It's just like, let's say this stuff's the idols. I mean, this could be an idol, right? So it's doing this kind of picture. Ehud's going towards the idols. The idol, this is in Israel, so who built them? The Israelites. He goes to the idols, and it's at that moment he's like, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And he turns, which is symbolic for repentance, at the idol. And he turns back and he goes, I got to finish doing what I was called to do. And it's symbolic saying, I'm going to, it's just, in the Hebrew, it's just giving a big picture that you need to turn from your idols. That you need to turn, if this was graphically done in a movie, you could just make that really cool and set up where Ehud's going and he's at the idols, and this is the place where maybe we should worship, and he's like, no, this isn't the right worship. I'm repenting of this and I'm turning back and I'm going to do my God-appointed mission because I didn't do it when I was supposed to. So he turns back at the idols near Gilgal, and then he says, I have a secret message for you, O king. The word message, davar, can mean thing or message. So he does have a secret thing for the king. But when he says it, I have a secret message. So I used to bang on the story because he's a liar, and technically he didn't lie. He's technically not lying. He's using a double-edged sword with his mouth. So I have a message for you, king. And the king commands silence, and he kicks all of his attendants out from his presence. And so Ehud, verse 20, comes to him as he's sitting alone in the cool roof chamber, bathroom. The way it worked is you'd have the throne room, down here, and then in the back, the king would have a room up here, and it would have a bench with a hole in it. And it would be elevated so that you could, sit and do your stuff. And the reason why it was cool, because there's a hole in it. So it's not closed off, and you do your business kind of like an outhouse, but built up, and then there would be a container where the stuff would drop, and the servants would take it and throw it out. So he has to go to the bathroom, so he kicks the servants out. He goes into the bathroom. He's like, Ehud, come here and talk to me. So he's sitting in the bathroom. So I told you, this is a funny story. So he's sitting in that chamber, and Ehud says, again, I have a message, which could be I have a thing from God. And the word God here isn't Jehovah, it's Elohim. And Elohim can mean God or gods. So the way Ehud hears this on the bathroom, he hears Ehud, who just has been reported at the idols, turns from the idols and comes back. So it would look like, Ehud got divine revelation from the idols, from those gods, because it literally says a message from Elohim, gods. So he's saying to Eglon, hey, I have the words, the literal words, I have a message from the gods. But in Ehud's mind, it's, I have a message from the God. No, I have a thing from God. Because he doesn't have a message. He has a thing. It's called the double-edged sword. And so, I have a message for you from God. And the way Eglon hears it, I have a thing for you from God. The way Eglon hears it, I have a message from God's for you. And he rose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand, takes the sword from his right thigh, and thrusts it into the belly of the king. And the hilt also went in to the blade, after the blade. So it's a cubit. So it's this plus, so it's going in there. It's deep, right? It goes in there. And then the hilt went after the blade, and the fat closed over it, and he did not pull the sword out of the belly. The word for fat here is different than the word for fat used when it says he was a fat man. The word fat here is always used when the Israelites would do sacrifices, and they would burn the fat. It's the part that should be sacrificed. And so it's literally basically saying Eglon, the calf, the young bull, is fatted. It's the fatted calf. So it's sacrificial language. Ehud is making a sacrifice for the people of Israel by killing this guy. It has very cult-like. When I use the word cultic, I mean like cultic is an expression of the Hebrew, like all of the things and symbols that are done by any worship service. This is changed from idol worship to cultic Hebrew worship of proper sacrifices of the fatted calf, and the fatted calf happens to be this king. And he did not pull the sword out, and then it says, and the dung came out, because he needed to go to the bathroom. So in the shock of getting stabbed, he goes to the bathroom. And this is important, because then Ehud, he goes out of the porch. It's kind of, it should be technically, he closes the door of the roof, and then he goes out of the porch, because this is what he's doing. He just stabbed the king on the toilet, and then he's like, I got to get out of here. So he goes, and he locks the doors to the king's chamber. And how does he escape then? Well, there was that movie, Slumdog Millionaire. That's what he does. If you've seen that movie, you would know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, well, you can imagine. He dives out through the toilet. And when he had gone, the servants came, and they saw the shut doors of the roof chamber were locked, and they thought, surely he is revealing himself in the closet of the cool chamber. And it would add to it that he just went to the bathroom number 2, and it would create the smell that they'd be like, yeah, that's what happened. And then they waited till they were embarrassed. But when he still did not open the door of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there laid their lord dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passes by the idols. He doesn't stop. So he's already repented of them, and now he ignores them, and he keeps going forward to Syria. And so the whole bathroom thing allows him to escape. And when he arrives, he sounds the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to him, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him, seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time 10,000 Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. This is literally the same word, fat, that was used by Eglon. So they're all like, they're bigger because they've been getting fat on the tribute for 18 years. But it doesn't matter, because when you are faithful to God, he will give you the victory. And they were all strong, able-bodied men, but not one of those strong men escaped. So Moab was subdued that day and under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. So there's something positive here. Ehud's not an ideal judge. He's using kind of trickery, and he's an assassin. He's not quite as good as Othniel. The judges are getting a little bit worse in character, but God gives them rest for 80 years instead of 40 under the leadership of Ehud. He is an unlikely hero. He is a cripple. Basically, both Othniel and Ehud are on the better end of the spectrum of the quality of the judges, but they're both unlikely. You have one who's not a pure Israelite, born of a foreign alien grafted in, and then you have the other one who's crippled, and both of them do things, and they're faithful to God, and they deliver them. So God can use unlikely heroes. Even later, when they're not as faithful and not as good, they're still unlikely, and God uses them. And so that's important, that God can use anyone. So, speaking of left-handed people, my brother, is left-handed. And I would have never imagined that he would do any kind of ministry whatsoever, even after he got converted, because he's not. I'll say this picture. When it was bedtime, and my mom would come into the room, and for the longest time, Mom would read me books at bedtime. And that was like one of my favorite times of the day, was getting read these stories. Once Jacob came along and we shared a room, I don't want to hear this. I don't want this. I don't want. And so story time was ruined because he didn't like books. And that never stopped. He liked drawing, but he didn't like books. He didn't like reading. He didn't like school. He didn't like doing any of that stuff. So I like books. I like stories. I like reading. So like even when I'm getting converted and I'm hearing the preacher preach and I'm like, that's just like a book report. I could do that. Yeah, I would like doing that. I'd like this preaching thing. So, I get converted and later Jacob gets converted and I'm like, what is Jacob going to do? He can't do this. He doesn't like to read. I don't even think this is going to last. Like the whole thing about Christianity is based on reading. Like, I don't know. He's read the whole Bible multiple times. He's read all the testimonies of the church. He went back to school before me. He started a book club. He preaches. He reads. Now he does it his way. He draws his sermon notes. He uses his art. He fights in his own armor, you could say. But you wouldn't think that this left-handed artist would ever be a pastor. If you took a test, even if he was raised Evans, do a test with what his natural abilities, it would not say, yeah, you should be a pastor in those, what are those, what you should do things? And he is. So he's like an Ehud, this left-handed guy who didn't like reading. He gets converted and God changes him. We could have latent talents that we just don't exercise that could come out if we just accept service of God. I'm still waiting for him to suddenly make me be able to sing, but maybe in heaven. Anyways, so my appeal to you today, when it comes to these two heroes, the two biggest things. One, living a boring, faithful life, following God's never boring, but I'm talking about you might not have the wild excitement that living an unfaithful life may do, but it is so much sweeter, and embrace that, especially if you're listening to this and you're young. You can still have crazy adventures. I mean, Othniel went to battle. Othniel went to battle and won his wife going to battle. I mean, that's not boring. But your story might not be one that you can get up and be wow everyone from the pulpit. But if you're faithful, it'll just be a better life. Othniel is that example. And then we have the example that you might not fit the mold. You might not fit the mold as an elder or a deacon or whatever it is that the church is calling you to do. You might not fit the mold. But that doesn't bother God. God likes people who don't fit the mold. So stop letting yourself be limited by what other people put you in a box. Break out of it and just do what God asks you to do. Be an Ehud, be an Othniel. Let us pray. Well, Heavenly Father, just thank you for the lives, the biographies that you've given in your word. And as we look through the rest of them, it's going to get worse, but it's nice to start out saying, hey, there were people who did the right thing, who were faithful, and you blessed and gave them victory. There were people who weren't the ideal soldier. They were crippled. They didn't fit the mold, but you actually used that to your benefit and delivered Israel. May you use whatever we have and somehow in some way bring a huge blessing to those around us in whatever capacity that you want to do. And in fact, you'll probably do it in such a way that it'll be above and beyond what we could ask or think. Please do this for us. I pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.